What is up, guys? So I wanted to talk about The Exorcist while we still have a week left of spooky time. This is my first video on this channel. I already have a horror channel that I can provide a link to in case you guys want to check that out as well. But I realized that I wanted to expand my content from besides just reading horror stories, which I do on the horror channel. So that's why I decided I was going to put this main channel of mine to use. I'm an English professor, so I like talking about literature and art and media and stuff like that. And I posted unlisted videos on this channel for my classes, but I decided I would bite the bullet and post a public video and see what kind of response I would get. And so, like I said, because it is Halloween and I love Halloween season, I decided to kick this channel off by talking about my favorite horror movie and one of my favorite movies in general, The Exorcist. So, I recently watched this video from The Take entitled The Surprising Message of The Exorcist Ending Explained. In it, they express a reading of the film that comes up fairly often, that the film's body horror is linked to an anxiety over female sexuality.
Reagan's possession can be read as expressing our culture's fear of young girls being spoiled by the onset of sexuality. Reagan's behavior here is especially shocking and explicit. She goes from being a sweet child to someone profane, violent, and inappropriately sexual. All this could symbolize that puberty and sexual urges are like violations of a child's inherent purity. At the end of the film, everyone's relieved that Reagan has no memory of her demonic possession.
She doesn't remember any of it.
That's good.
So it's as if she's been restored to the innocent little girl she's meant to be. But this regression sends the troubling message that Reagan maturing into a young woman is unnatural and horrific.
It's a reading that makes sense, especially with the historical context of the profound social changes the United States faced in the decade preceding the film's release, specifically the sexual revolution. The film even might be suggesting that the absence of Reagan's father, and thus the absence of a traditional family structure in Reagan's life, is one of the reasons she falls prey to the demon. It's an interpretation with which The Take also agrees.
One key aspect of the Exorcist story is the absent father. On one level, Reagan's demonic possession represents a larger fear about what happens when the nuclear family is disrupted and lacks a father figure.
So, it could be said that the demon's sexual vulgarity in the film is presented in The Exorcist as the natural result of unfettered female sexuality, thought to lead to the dissolution of traditional family units. The exorcism returns Reagan from an obscene sexual state to a pure state that everyone is glad for. And as The Take also says, she embraces Father Dyer, seeming to know priests saved her and seeming to adopt priests as the father she never had.
In the last scenes of the film, Reagan kisses the cheek of another priest, and it's as if she's declaring her faith, marking God as the true father in her life, and all priests as a proxy for him.
She knows, it seems, that a male, fatherly figure is what she always needed in her life to set her on the right path and keep her from becoming what the demon turns her into, someone lewd and rebellious like the teens and young adults brazenly defying social norms during the 1960s. But I have to say, I don't think the author of the novel and screenwriter of the film, William Peter Blatty, is being puritanical or misogynistic per se with The Exorcist. Perhaps he simply means to make a comment on rebellious youth in general. Interestingly, almost every time we see children in the film of The Exorcist, boys as well as girls, they are roughhousing, jumping on cars, going about unsupervised trick-or-treating, etc. I have no idea if Blatty strategically placed these moments in the script, but there they are, potentially sending a not-so-flattering message about the youth of Blatty's day, who, like Reagan, Blatty thinks might need saving. And by saving, I mean saving in the Christian sense. The future, perhaps represented by the wayward children in the film, needs Christ if we are to have any hope. And of course Blatty would think this, being a devout Catholic. Blatty's ultimate purpose with The Exorcist, I think, is apostolic, and everything he does with the movie, including the body horror, is probably more geared towards sending his Christian message than criticizing unrestrained sexuality or female sexuality perceived as evil. That isn't to say interpretations like the ones given by The Take are invalid, just perhaps less likely considering what it appeared Blatty ultimately wanted to do with his story, which is send a Christian message. I recently reread the novel, or rather I listened to it as an audiobook while doing one of my walks I started since COVID hit, and I hardly get the impression from the novel that Blatty was this staunchly puritanical figure when it came to matters of sexuality. In fact, one could argue from the novel at least, that Blatty sees sexual relationships in an apparently positive light, and interestingly enough, not necessarily only in the context of heterosexual marriage. One quote from Father Merrin in the novel sticks out to me when he's trying to answer Father Karras' question about a demon's purpose for possession. Merrin says, "I tend to see possession most often in the little things, Damien, in the senseless petty spites and misunderstandings, the cruel and cutting word that leaps unbidden to the tongue between friends, between lovers, between husbands and wives." Now, Merrin mentions 3 types of relationships here: platonic, romantic, and marital. And he seems to think positively of all, considering he is bemoaning that possession, referring here to the work of demons in this world of turning people against one another, ruins all of these relationships, including the latter 2, which nearly always have a sexual element. Sexual relationships always involve physical touch, something Blatty seems to see as important in loving others. In the novel, Blatty describes the Jesuit community at Georgetown and their anxiety about expressing physical affection, though they crave it. A young priest confesses to Father Karras early in the novel, "I'd like to put my arm around another guy's shoulder, but right away I'm scared he's going to think I'm queer, so I just don't do it. I won't even go to somebody's room just to listen to records or to talk or to smoke." Karras is annoyed to have to deal with this man's problems. The text even says he briefly hates the priest for coming to see him. Karras struggles with his faith in God after his mother's death throughout the book as well as the film, and this seems to affect his ability to love, the very thing the young priest needs in coming to Karras. A lack of love makes Karras doubt Regan's possession and delay getting an exorcism for her, even though it's the loving thing to do. Karras' whole arc can be described as learning to love others, no matter who or what they are. His arc indeed culminates with him performing an act of self-sacrificial love for a girl he only ever knew as a hideous demon. So, I think what Blatty is saying is that human love, no matter the nature of the relationship, platonic, romantic, sexual, or otherwise, is important, and that physical expression of love is important too, and that love, when expressed boldly and without fear, can help others, save them even. It can help the young priest struggling to express affection, and it can save Regan, who is finally rid of the demon only when Father Karras gives his life for her. So, I don't think I'd consider The Exorcist anti-sexuality or anti-woman. It is most certainly pro-love, including love of a physical nature. Well, homosocial and heterosexual physical love at least. And this leads me to my main point. The Exorcist, I'd argue, isn't saying that sexuality is ugly or evil, but that it is beautiful, sacred even. More broadly, every aspect of our bodies, sexuality and all of our other bodily features, are said to be beautiful in The Exorcist. The demon's vulgarity is just an attempt to trick us into believing otherwise. The demon performs all manner of disgusting bodily acts, beyond the sexual acts it performs via Regan. It vomits, for example, in that famous scene in the movie. It does the unnatural head-spinning thing. Merrin explains plainly and clearly what the demon is trying to do with all this in the novel, and in a scene cut from the original version of the film.
I think that the point is to make us despair. To see ourselves as animal and ugly. To reject the possibility that God could love us.
So yeah, Blatty isn't subtle about this at all. In fact, the scene was cut from the original because director William Friedkin felt it was overstatement, a message made explicit better left implicit. The demon means to make us look bestial, like animals. If the demon who possesses Reagan is Pazuzu, as the novel and film imply from his appearance as a statue in the Iraq sequence, it makes sense he'd go this route. He's made of human and animal parts himself. He performs in Reagan what Mikhail Bakhtin calls the grotesque. The grotesque involves that which protrudes from the body. We see that in the projectile vomiting in the film, and there's plenty of descriptions of Reagan's bodily discharges beyond this in the book. Bakhtin also says that the combination of human and animal traits is one of the most ancient grotesque forms. Reagan makes lots of animal sounds in the novel we don't hear in the film, lowing like a steer, for example. And we also see some animal behavior in the film as well. There's the infamous spider walk scene from the extended version, for one. In the original version of the scene and in the book, Reagan flicks her tongue like a snake at the end. We also see Reagan lolling her tongue out in the film. Some say this is more sexual vulgarity from the demon, but Blatty's description in the book of the lolling being wolfish suggests it is meant to be more animal than sexually provocative. So yeah, the demon means to portray Reagan as this gross, ugly beast. Animal and ugly, as Father Marin says. We're all just animals, like some might think of the homeless man, for example, that Father Karras encounters. So, how could God love us? But in the book, animals aren't always mentioned in a demonic context. We have a few positive examples of them. When Marin is called to perform the exorcism, we find him in a natural setting. The book says he is surrounded by a nature that he loved, among animals like a singing robin and a bright butterfly. It's a great contrast to the horrifying, grotesque animal images Pazuzu provides. This symbolism is obvious here. We meet Marin here in this beautiful natural world surrounded by beautiful animals because he is going to show that our bodies are beautiful, not animal and ugly, by performing the exorcism on Reagan, expelling the demon's false image of her body and personality. Father Karras, of course, emerges as the Christ figure of the book and the film. In the book, he even has a Garden of Gethsemane moment before sacrificing himself for Reagan. He reads a poem Reagan wrote for her mother that includes a positive image of an animal, a bird in this case, perhaps representing the Holy Spirit, combining with other natural elements into a beautiful human form. Reagan's poem reads, "If instead of just clay, I could take all the prettiest things, like a rainbow or clouds or the way a bird sings, maybe then, dearest mommy, if I put them all together, I could really make a sculpture of you." After reading this poem, Karras seems to see that the natural world of God's creation, animals and human bodies, are not truly ugly as Pazuzu had tried to make them appear. He rages at the distortion of the body's beauty, at disease and at pain, and also at the monstrous and outrageous corruption of death. The demon even pukes on him one last time in the book to try to deter him from making his sacrifice, but it has no effect. Karras simply ignores it. He can see past Reagan's ugliness, loves her, and sacrifices himself for her, even though he never knew the real her, only what she appeared to be. Now, the metaphor here is obvious per Blatty's distinctly unsubtle style. To God, because he is perfect, we appear as nothing but evil and vile, but he loves us anyway. He sacrifices himself for us anyway. We see all of that in how Karras throws himself out the window for Reagan. There is an apostolic purpose to The Exorcist, as we noted before. Certainly Blatty wants us to believe in God's love and Christ's love for us through his death on the cross. I think the ultimate purpose of the body horror we see in The Exorcist isn't a reflection of anxieties about unrestrained female sexuality, unconventional family structures, or anything like that. The reason why is because the body horror doesn't stop at Reagan. What happens to Father Karras is some pretty horrific body horror in and of itself, and it seems to reflect what happens to Christ at his crucifixion. Karras' body is crumpled and bloody. This isn't in the movie, but in the book, someone notes Reagan's vomit on his shirt and decides Karras must have been drunk, similar to how the Pharisees called Jesus a glutton and a drunkard. Karis defeats the demon's body horror by showing that even in a cruel world where death is rampant and our bodies are imperfect, vulnerable, and often disgusting, love can prevail. Karis loved Reagan despite the horrors of her body, and his love for her prevails despite the horrors that happened to his body. Similarly, though Christ's death was bloody and horrific and appeared to be the execution of a common criminal, it was actually, Blatty communicates through the ending of The Exorcist, the purest act of love done by the purest man who ever lived, a man who is God himself. If we can realize that, then the demon's use of body horror to convince us God doesn't love us will never work. We'll always be able to see past it, just as we can see past the bloody ugliness of Christ's crucifixion and realize the love truly behind it. So yeah, that's what I think The Exorcist, with its head spinning and crucifix masturbation and projectile vomiting, is really getting at. It's a horror movie, but it's also a Christian movie, with a Christian message. Its purpose is similar to the Gospels, which we can't forget contain some pretty horror movie level stuff themselves, like demonic possession for one, and also Christ's bloody and violent crucifixion. But is all the gross body stuff in The Exorcist anti-woman, anti-sex, or anything like that? I wouldn't say so. As William Friedkin says, at least of the film, I'm not aware of any far-reaching social problems that The Exorcist dealt with. That usually comes later, when people have run out of things to say about the film. They start describing the social implications of it. I've read some really wonderful theories about The Exorcist. They're absolutely great. They're brilliant. They're nothing to do with anything we intended. That said, the social conservatism we might see in The Exorcist isn't necessarily false, but it certainly isn't the only interpretation, as I hope I've demonstrated. Alright guys, so that was the video. I hope you enjoyed. This film means a lot to me, and I'm so glad that I had a chance to talk about it. What I just said was something I actually produced for one of my classes also, and I thought sharing it publicly would be a fun idea. So I hope y'all got something out of it. Like I said, I have my horror channel as well, where I read horror stories, true stories, creepypasta, classics, horror stories, etc. If you want to check that out, it's called Assorted Horrors. So thank you guys so much for your support. Please subscribe if you like the video if you enjoyed it, and I will see y'all in a new video, hopefully in the near future. Thank you guys so much.